When we're actively involved in discussions, arguments, and activism about a particular issue and belong to an online community that provides an outlet to do so, it's easy to slip into the presumptuous position that expects everyone else to be as privy to the talking points and details of that issue as we are. We often expect the average person to be familiar with the terms and the most popular arguments associated with both sides of those given issues that we immerse ourselves in. We might even assume that just about everybody is at least aware of the heat waves thrown off by the fire of the controversial discussion's friction. However, that simply is not always the case, even on the big issues like those two dirty topics that we're taught to avoid in the interest of polite conversation, like religion and politics. Unfortunately, a vast number of deeply religious people have never been challenged on their beliefs. They've never had to justify their position with logical arguments or support their claims with evidence, not because they're closeted about their convictions, but rather because they're victims of a majority culture that supports their opinions and never offers them the gift of scrutiny. Meanwhile, their brains produce subtle, fallacious reasoning to justify their cognitive dissonance. Things like confirmation bias, special pleading, Pascal's wager, the Kalam cosmological argument, and other such fallacies or arguments that have been debunked enough times to have such labels are steadily slipped to them by their preachers or parents or developed subconsciously. Many of these people live their entire lives without ever being questioned or pushed on these points, and when it happens later in life, they often don't know how to handle it. It's like raising children to be utter pacifists their whole lives before throwing them into boxing rings. When initially encountering rational dissent, an honest minority admit that they hadn't realized the chinks in the armor of their beliefs, and they have to think those points through or at least ask their pastors about them. Many more shy nervously away from the discussion in fear of having to deal with the discomfort of reality. A good number of the particularly stubborn, however, get angry. They lash out, raise their volume, or even physically intimidate the people who are trying to subvert the shackles of their indoctrination. They allow those ripples in the calm sea of the preconceived understanding of reality they have to erupt into a squall of emotional self-defense. They'll hurl more fallacious reasoning or painfully poor excuses for evidence or rhetoric at you, and the more you explain to them rather than absorbing the education, the more resistant and reckless they become. This isn't to say that being angry guarantees your argument is wrong, or that anger in debates is always rooted in people being unchallenged for most of their lives. I wish I was referring to the small number of the religious community here, but in America I'm willing to speculate that I'm referring to the majority of casual Christians here. They haven't read their own Bible, they haven't questioned that they were taught to believe, and worst of all, they've been conditioned to feel that their position gives them a moral high ground so stalwart that the mere act of questioning them should be considered disrespectful and unacceptably offensive. I'm going to link you to an example of this very problem posted by a quality YouTuber called Complete Rationality. He recorded a street preacher babbling at his college, but the real value of the footage doesn't occur until about 23.5 minutes in, when the crowd around him starts to interact with him for daring to question the religious banter. When his attention shifts from the preacher to the audience, we see a disturbing example of the problem I've described. Look on their confused, disturbed, and insulted faces as you witness the first time many of them have ever had to argue their position, and despite their numbers, they're woefully outmatched by one man with the unfair advantage of being right. The link's below, or you can click the annotation to skip right to the place where I'm referring to. Brace yourselves, though. It's tough to watch.